I didn't expect a red carpet. I didn't need applause or camera flashes. Honestly, I didn't even need a seat at the front. I just wanted to be there, to show up for her, to make her proud, to remind her that she didn't get here alone. That behind every milestone of hers, there was someone quietly standing in the shadows, clapping the loudest. That someone was me. That night, I stepped out of the car a little earlier than planned. I wanted to surprise her. The black tux I wore was the same one from our wedding, tailored again, a little tighter around the shoulders now. I held a small, elegant box in my hand. Inside was a Mont Blanc timepiece, limited edition, black leather band, sapphire crystal face. She'd once mentioned it casually when passing through a boutique in Milan. Understated but powerful, she said. Just like you. I walked up to the venue, heart light, steps firm. The lights from the ballroom streamed through tall windows like golden silk. It was Argento and Gray's 10-year anniversary, a night Isla had been working toward for months. Actually, for years. And I'd helped build it, piece by piece. From quiet dinners discussing strategy to weekends I gave up so she could rehearse speeches. From seed capital to late-night coffee runs. The foyer was buzzing with guests. Men in tailored suits, women in elegant gowns, champagne flutes clinking softly as jazz floated in the background. I approached the reception desk, smiling. "Reed Callahan," I said, adjusting my cuffs slightly. "Here for Isla." The young woman behind the desk typed something. Then again, her expression shifted. "I'm sorry," she said, voice polite but brisk. "I don't see that name on the list." I blinked, surprised but calm. "Could you check again?" "I'm her husband." She hesitated and glanced toward a man standing near the door, earpiece in his ear, hand resting on his belt. "Security. I'll call someone," she offered, clearly uncomfortable. Moments later, a tall man in a charcoal gray suit walked toward us. I recognized him instantly. Damon, Isla's CFO. We'd met a few times. He gave me a cursory nod. "Reed. Hey. There seems to be a mix-up with the guest list," I said lightly, still holding the gift box. Damon didn't bother to look at the list. "This event's just for core staff and major stakeholders." I frowned. "I helped fund this event." "Right," he said, glancing at his watch. "But you're not technically part of the leadership team." That stung. I opened my mouth to reply, but he beat me to it, turning to the guard nearby. "He's not on the list. Please escort him out." The guard stepped forward gently but firmly. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to leave the premises." I didn't speak. "Not yet." And then Damon, as he turned back toward the ballroom, said it. Not even under his breath. "Get this beggar out of here." That's when the room seemed to slow. "Beggar?" I stood there, tux perfectly pressed, holding a gift that cost more than the average rent in the city, and somehow in their world, I was a beggar? I looked past him into the ballroom. There she was, Isla, standing under a chandelier, surrounded by executives and board members. Her dress was emerald green, her smile wide. She was radiant, powerful, exactly how I'd always wanted her to feel. But something inside me, something buried under years of quiet sacrifices, cracked. I didn't fight. I didn't argue. Instead, I turned. I walked back down the marble steps, past the valet who smiled politely and clearly had no idea what had just happened. I didn't give him the ticket for the car. I needed a moment. I walked 2 blocks in silence, still holding the box. My phone buzzed once, probably a promotional email. Not Isla. She didn't know yet. Or maybe she did. Maybe it was intentional. I wasn't sure what was worse. I sat on a cold bench outside a closed bakery and finally opened the box, not to look at the watch, but just to breathe. I stared at the clean design, the engraved backplate that said, "For all the time you gave me." The irony nearly made me laugh. It wasn't just a watch. It was a thank you, a symbol, of time spent supporting her dreams, of hours and years I gave without asking for much. Not credit, not a seat at the board, just respect, just a place at her side. And yet, on the night of her biggest celebration, the man who watched her rise from shaky proposals to Forbes interviews had become invisible. Worse, unwelcome. I wasn't angry yet. Not really. I was numb. Numb in the way you get when you realize the person you built your world around never really built theirs around you. I sat there for almost an hour, thinking, replaying conversations. The times I said, "Let's wait on that vacation," put it into the company instead. The nights I packed her lunches before big pitch meetings. The time I stayed up until 4 a.m. adjusting her keynote slides because her designer quit last minute. How many of those sacrifices had become expectations? And how many of those expectations had turned into erasure? I walked home. I didn't slam doors or throw the watch against the wall like some bitter ex in a soap opera. No, that wasn't me. I walked into our apartment, clean, minimalist, filled with curated art pieces she loved, and placed the watch on the marble counter. Then I stood still, and something in me shifted. It wasn't rage. It wasn't heartbreak. It was clarity. I realized that somewhere along the line, I had been edited out of the story. I was the invisible ink in the footnotes. And now they were celebrating the novel, pretending I never helped write the first chapters. I looked around at the space we built together. And for the first time in a long time, I started thinking, not about how to support her next move, but how to make mine. The next morning, I stood in the kitchen staring at the coffee maker like it might give me answers. The apartment was quiet, too quiet. No footsteps on the marble tiles. No humming from the bathroom as Isla got ready. No scent of her perfume floating through the hall. Just silence. Heavy and clear. She'd stayed out after the gala. Of course she had. Probably went straight to the hotel suite they'd booked for the night. A perk I'd prepaid with my own card 3 months ago when I still believed I'd be at her side, smiling for pictures and clinking glasses. When I still believed I was part of the journey. I took my coffee black. No cream today. Something about sweetness felt wrong. As I stood by the window looking over the city we'd carved our lives into, my mind wandered back through the years. Quiet, steady memories that now played like proof in a courtroom. We met when Isla was just launching Argento and Gray. Back then, it was her and a small rented office with peeling paint and a stubborn thermostat. I remember bringing her takeout during late nights, setting up a makeshift whiteboard with sticky notes because she couldn't afford one. I remember pulling out a small loan under my name to help cover her first marketing run. It's just until we land that first big client, she'd said. You'll get it back. I wasn't looking for reimbursement. I was looking for partnership, for something we could build together. But somehow, over time, it became her dream and my responsibility, her spotlight and my shadow. She started climbing fast, networking, closing deals, building a brand. And I clapped. I clapped even when she stopped introducing me as her husband at some events, opting instead for Reed, he works in finance, as if that explained my presence better. She loved the image. The story of the girl boss who made it on her own, who rose without help. And I let her tell it, because I loved her. But now? Now it felt like I'd paid for a ticket to a movie I wasn't allowed to watch. Worse, like I'd funded the production and been cut from the credits. I pulled open the drawer next to the fridge where we kept old receipts and warranties. Most people forgot about those drawers, messy little timelines of financial choices. I didn't. I kept every receipt, every bank statement, every invoice tagged and filed. I'd always been meticulous. Isla teased me about it once, said I was financially romantic. I guess that's one way to say, you're doing all the boring, important things while I take the glory. That drawer held our real history. A lease payment here. A conference fee there. New laptops for her interns. Office chairs. Flights to meet clients. Promotional videos. Staff bonuses, 12 of them, signed under my account. Most people would have seen a pile of expenses. I saw love letters. The kind that don't get framed or posted on Instagram. As I sifted through them, I realized something. I wasn't just forgotten. I'd been used. Silently. Willingly. And maybe that was the worst part. How easily I'd let it happen in the name of love. When Isla finally walked through the door at noon, she looked collected. No shame. No apology. Just her usual poised self in designer sunglasses and a blazer I'd gifted her last Christmas. She took them off and looked at me like I was a minor inconvenience. Read, she said, setting down her bag. About last night, I raised a hand gently. You don't have to explain. But of course she did. It was a curated event. We had to keep the guest list tight. Sponsors, investors, internal leads, you didn't think I qualified. Her eyes darted. It wasn't personal. That was the line that did it. That's when I finally looked her in the eye and said, it was always personal. You just stopped seeing me as part of it. She rolled her eyes. Reed, don't do this. You're being dramatic. I almost laughed. Dramatic? After being thrown out of a party I helped pay for? After hearing someone call me a beggar while my wife stood beneath chandeliers I'd funded? I didn't argue. Instead, I walked over to the dining table, placed a folder down, and slid it toward her. You want to talk facts? Let's talk. She opened it, confused. Inside were neatly printed spreadsheets, expenses tracked over the past 7 years. My name, my cards, my accounts, a timeline of invisible support. Each column was labeled: date, purpose, payment type, amount, notes. Total support value, $198,740.34. She stared at the number. What is this? Our story. The part you never tell. She said nothing. I leaned back in my chair. You didn't just forget me. You erased me. And I let you. Because I thought love was about giving. But at some point, love became an invoice with only one name at the bottom. Read, she started, but stopped. I didn't ask you to do all this. You expected it. And I kept delivering. Her expression shifted, defensive, proud. This isn't fair. You always said you believed in what I was building. I did, I said. But now I realize you were never building it with me. You were building it on me. The silence between us felt thick, almost physical. Like we were sitting in the ruins of a home we both pretended was still standing. I stood up slowly and looked at her for a long moment. You don't need to apologize, I said. I'm not looking for that. Then what do you want? I gave a small, tired smile. Nothing. For once, I want absolutely nothing. And I meant it. There's a special kind of grief that comes from realizing you were never truly seen. That you were loved for your usefulness, not your presence. And that once your usefulness runs out, you become disposable. That night, I didn't touch dinner. I sat on the balcony, sipping a glass of wine alone, watching the city lights flicker on. Isla stayed in her office down the hall. Doors closed. Walls growing. I didn't cry. I didn't pack a bag. Not yet. I wasn't done thinking. I wasn't done feeling. But the shift had already begun. And somewhere deep inside me, a quiet voice whispered, she doesn't get to do this again. Not without consequence. I didn't plan to go to the gala. Not really. Originally, I thought I'd just leave the gift on her desk, send a quick text, and head back home. Let her shine. Let her have her moment. That's what she always said she needed, space to be seen. And for years, I gave it. But something about that night pulled at me. Maybe it was instinct. Or maybe it was foolish hope. That maybe, just maybe, after everything I'd poured into her company, into her, I'd show up, and she'd look at me like she used to. With warmth. With gratitude. With even a sliver of the love I'd spent years wrapping around her like armor. So I ironed the tux. It wasn't new, but it still fit like it had the first time. The same one I wore when we danced under dim fairy lights on our wedding night. Back then, we couldn't afford a ballroom. We'd rented a small community space, filled it with second-hand string lights, and borrowed chairs. She had whispered to me, someday, we'll host something in a place like that, pointing at a glossy ad in a bridal magazine. I remembered that ad now, because it looked eerily similar to where the Argento and Gray Gala was being held. The irony was sharp. We made it, and I had helped us get there. So I went. Quietly. No driver. No fanfare. I booked a cab, stepped out 2 blocks away, and walked in with the timepiece in my inner pocket, fingers resting against the box like I could transfer some warmth into it. I passed guests in velvet and silk, voices spilling into the street. My name wasn't on the list. I already knew that. I wasn't here for a seat. I was here to see it with my own eyes. I stood on the sidewalk across from the entrance, behind the valet station, just out of view. And there she was. Isla, my wife. Centerpiece of the night. She glided down the carpet like she was born for it. Cameras flashed. Her silver gown caught every light like a mirror. She waved, smiled, laughed, rehearsed but captivating. I watched her pose with executives, board members, and, yes, Jarrett. Jarrett. Tall. Tan. That fake casual confidence he always carried like a trophy. He was standing too close. Too familiar. Whispering something in her ear that made her laugh in a way I hadn't heard in months. Not at home. Not with me. I stepped back into the shadows, my stomach twisting, not from jealousy, but from clarity. I didn't belong here. Not because I wasn't worthy, but because they had carefully edited me out. I tried not to be bitter. Really. I tried to remind myself that ambition changes people. That success shifts the dynamics. That sometimes, people forget themselves in the process of becoming someone new. But the more I watched, the harder it became to excuse what I was seeing. They toasted with crystal glasses. The ballroom, draped in white and gold, held over 100 guests. All handpicked. All included. And yet, not one of them had my name on their lips. not even hers. I stepped closer, drawn in by the sound of her voice over the mic. A toast. I want to thank the people who believed in me when this was just a dream, she said, chin lifted, eyes sparkling. To my team, my partners, and my co-founder in spirit, Jared Gray, you are the other half of this company's heartbeat. The room clapped. Loudly. I didn't move. I didn't even blink. She continued, to those who gave me space to grow, who cheered from the sidelines. Thank you. This isn't just my night. It's ours. Sidelines. That's where I live now. A faceless cheerleader in the shadows. A thank you lumped in with general gratitude. Not a name. Not a face. Not even a nod. I looked down at the gift in my pocket. It felt heavier than before. I wasn't angry. Not yet. I think I was still holding on to some hope. So I did something stupid. I tried to go in. Not to crash it. Not to make a scene. Just to say congratulations. To see her. Face to face. Maybe feel like I existed again. That's when the security guard stopped me. The same scene replayed. Name. I told him. He didn't even look at the list. You're not cleared for entry. I asked, quietly, if he could check again. He didn't. Instead, he looked to the side, and there stood Jared. He walked over with a smile that didn't touch his eyes. Reed. Hey, sorry man. This is kind of an internal thing. I looked him over. Internal? Yeah, you know. Staff? Stakeholders. It's been tight. I paid for half the venue, I said calmly. He raised his eyebrows. You were reimbursed. I wasn't. He gave a low chuckle, like I was making something awkward. It's not the time or place, buddy. You'll make her uncomfortable. And that's when I saw Isla, watching, from inside the doorway. Our eyes met. She didn't come forward, didn't wave, didn't say anything, just looked. And then she turned her back. The guard took a step forward. Sir, I'm leaving, I said, lifting my hand. But Jared, because he couldn't help himself, leaned in and muttered, this is her world now. Might be time to stop holding her back. That was it. I didn't punch him. Didn't throw the box. Didn't scream. I just smiled. That quiet, chilling kind of smile. Because I knew something he didn't. He might have had the lights, the champagne, the crowd tonight. But the moment she needed the foundation of that world, the quiet deposits, the funding, the favors, the loyalty, it would all start shaking. And I would no longer be there to hold it still. I walked away, the box still in my pocket. I passed the photographers, the valet, the crowds. I didn't turn back. Not once. Because I'd finally seen it clearly. I wasn't a part of the celebration. I was the scaffolding they used to build it, and then discarded the moment the building stood tall enough. And now? Now I was done pretending that was okay. When I got home that night, I didn't switch on the lights. I didn't need to. The apartment was already too familiar. Every chair, every painting, every shelf placed just how she wanted it. I sat down at the dining table, the gift box still in my jacket pocket. The weight of it had shifted. It no longer felt like a symbol of appreciation. It felt like a receipt. A reminder of how long I'd been paying for a love that had quietly gone bankrupt. I reached for my laptop. It was sitting where I always left it, centered, charged, clean. I opened it like I had 100 times before. But tonight, it wasn't for spreadsheets or budgeting. It was for action. I went to the first tab I'd bookmarked weeks ago, our anniversary trip to Bora Bora. A private villa on the water, complete with a chef, couples massage, and underwater dining experience. I had paid the deposit in full, $13,500. A surprise. One I never got to reveal because she'd been too busy with back-to-back strategy sessions. Click. Canceled. Refund processed. Next, the Aspen Leadership Retreat. This one wasn't for us, but for her team. She told me the board needed a high-end bonding getaway to pitch to new investors. I'd paid the travel agency directly $18,000 for accommodations, ski passes, and executive lodging. Another favor. Another unthanked gift. Click. Access revoked. Confirmation email sent. Then came the corporate software license renewal, $7 for 100 from my consulting card. I logged into the vendor dashboard and updated the billing details to an empty shell account. Automatic renewal. Disabled. And the final blow, her upcoming executive lounge renovation. She wanted a private space in the office to think, complete with custom furniture and mood lighting. I'd already wired $21,400 to the design company, scheduled to complete in 4 weeks. I made a single phone call. "Read Callahan," I said, calm and polite. "I'd like to cancel the upcoming installation. Please issue a stop order." The payment was personal, not corporate. "I'll send written confirmation now." They complied. It took less than 90 minutes to undo over $60,000 worth of support. Money she never questioned. Support she never asked about twice. She just assumed it would be there, because I had always made sure it was. But not this time. By 2 a.m. I was still staring at my screen. The numbers weren't just digits. They were chapters of a story I hadn't realized I'd been writing alone. I thought about all the ways I'd said, "I love you," over the years without ever using those words. In hotel confirmations, in paid invoices, in arranged meetings, fixed computers, last-minute florist runs, and "don't worry, I've got it" texts. And not once had she stopped to ask if I was okay, if I needed something, if I felt seen. She used to. In the beginning, she'd hug me from behind while I made coffee. She'd say things like, "I couldn't do this without you," or "You're my favorite person." And then those phrases stopped. They were replaced by, "Did you pay the caterer yet?" Or "Can you call the driver?" Slowly, love became logistics. Marriage became management. And now? Now I was reducing my role back to zero. I logged into our shared calendar and deleted myself from every upcoming event. No +1 at her award dinner. No appearance at her quarterly fundraiser. I even removed my saved contacts from her PR firm's holiday mailing list. And finally, I did something that made my chest feel tight. I opened the shared folder labeled Callahan Argento Finances. I created a copy, renamed it Final, then removed my access from the original. I wasn't just pulling the plug on funding. I was pulling the plug on pretending. At 3:12 a.m., I received a notification, "Calendar change alert, Aspen Retreat booking removed." I ignored it. Then came a second, vendor balance dispute, email from events manager. Then the text, "ISLA, read, did you change something with the Aspen thing? Just got a weird message." I stared at the screen. Not "Hey," not "Can we talk," not "Are you okay?" Just straight to the transaction. I didn't reply. I shut the laptop slowly and stood in the middle of the kitchen, breathing in the silence. I looked around at the glass jars on the shelf, labeled, color-coded, perfectly stacked. All her design. All her world. I'd built it, but it never became mine. I walked to the bedroom, slid the Mont Blanc watch box onto her pillow. Then I packed a bag. Not to leave permanently, but enough to make the silence noticeable. As I zipped the suitcase, a memory crept in. Her voice from years ago. "If I ever get too big for myself, promise me you'll remind me who I really am." I almost smiled, because this was that moment, and she hadn't even noticed it arrived. At exactly 9:07 p.m. the next evening, my phone lit up. I had just poured a glass of scotch, nothing fancy, just something smooth enough to take the edge off, and was sitting on the balcony of the hotel I checked into that morning. A small place. Quiet. Nothing like the marble and glass loft Isla and I called home. But it felt real. Simple. Honest. The screen buzzed again. ISLA 2 missed calls. I let it ring out. Then came the texts. ISLA, read. Did you cancel the Bali suite? Isla. What's going on with the Aspen payment? The agency said the deposit bounced. Marcy, her assistant. Hey. Sorry to bother you, but quick question. Did you change the payment method for the gala videographer? They emailed about a voided charge. Super confused. I took another sip and scrolled. Jared. Yo. Did you pull the plug on the caterer? What the hell, man? That one made me pause. Man. He had never called me that before. Never messaged me directly unless it was about logistics. Always filtered his needs through Isla. But now? Now they needed me. Not because they missed me, but because the foundation was crumbling, and the person who kept it level had finally stepped back. The flood came next. Ping, ping, ping. A waterfall of alerts from the payment processor. Notice, autopay failure, Argento and Gray annual licensing renewal. Reminder, travel itinerary voided. Contact your agent to reschedule. Warning, office renovation project paused due to insufficient funds. I set the phone down without replying, not because I was being cruel, but because silence, real, deliberate silence, speaks louder than any revenge speech or petty argument ever could. At 9:41 p.m., another call buzzed in. Then another. Then another. By the time I finished the scotch, the tally was 36 missed calls, 17 texts, and 2 voicemails, both from Isla. I didn't listen to them. Instead, I walked to the hotel lobby, handed the front desk a polite smile, and requested no further calls be patched through to my room. I turned off notifications, placed the phone face down on the nightstand, and for the first time in what felt like years, I went to sleep without a to-do list waiting in the morning. But rest doesn't always bring peace. I woke up at 6:13 a.m. to soft knocking. At first, I thought it was housekeeping. Then I heard it. That voice. Tired. A little frantic. Muffled through the door. "Reed, are you in there?" I sat up slowly. She knocked again. "Please, just open the door." I didn't move right away. I just listened. Her breathing was uneven. No heels today. No confident footsteps or clipped tone. Just Isla. Raw. Stripped of pretense. Not the version she gave the media or the board. The version she only let me see when things went wrong. Still, I hesitated. It took 3 more knocks before I got up, pulled on a shirt, and opened the door. She looked nothing like the woman from the gala. No makeup. Hair tied back. Pale. Wrinkled shirt like she hadn't changed since the night before. "Hi," she said, voice soft. She tried to smile, but it collapsed halfway. I stepped aside. She entered the room quietly, eyes scanning the small space. 1 bed, 1 chair, a half-open suitcase on the floor. No extravagance, no luxury, just me, as I've always been. "I've been trying to call," she said, wringing her hands. I saw. Silence stretched between us. She sat on the edge of the bed. I stayed by the window. "You didn't have to cancel everything," she said finally. It felt vindictive. I turned to her, calm. Was it vindictive to leave me off the guest list? To stand there while they called me a beggar? She looked down. "That wasn't supposed to happen. The list was curated. For image. For your image," I corrected. She didn't argue. "I'm not trying to fight," she said, voice cracking a little. I didn't expect you to go this far." "This far?" I echoed. "You mean finally drawing a line? Is that what this is?" she whispered. "Drawing a line? Or erasing me?" I sat in the chair across from her. "No, Isla. I'm erasing myself. From a version of this marriage where I only existed when you needed a transaction. Where my love was measured in wire transfers and logistical favors. Where you celebrated with people who didn't even know my name." I didn't realize how bad it had gotten. I nodded. "Exactly. You didn't realize." She went quiet again, chewing on her lower lip. "The truth is," she said slowly, "I didn't want the world to see how much I still leaned on you. I wanted to look independent, strong, self-made. You could have been all those things," I said, without cutting me out. "I know," she admitted, tears now gathering. "I thought I was proving something." "You were," I said, "but not what you think." She looked at me then, really looked. And for the first time in years, I saw regret in her eyes that felt real. Not performative, not dramatic, just real. "I miss you," she said. "No," I replied gently. "You miss what I did for you." She flinched, like the words hit harder than she expected. "That's not fair. It's honest." She reached into her bag and pulled out her phone. Opened something, then handed it to me. A list of paused projects. Declined payments. A note from one of her investors demanding clarity before next week's pitch. "They're all freaking out," she whispered. "I'm not your fixer anymore." She nodded, eyes brimming. "So what happens now?" I stood up, walked to the desk, took out a printed copy of the spreadsheet I'd prepared, the one I hadn't shown her yet. Every expense I'd covered, every act of silent support. Labeled, dated, totaled. I handed it to her. She didn't speak as she read. Her eyes widened. Her mouth trembled. "You kept track of all this?" "No," I said. "I kept track of me. Because no one else was." Her tears finally fell. And I didn't comfort her. Not out of cruelty. But because I was finally learning what it felt like to let someone else sit with the consequences of their choices. "I need to think," she whispered. "I've already started." I didn't expect her to come back. Not so soon, anyway. The last time we spoke, if you could call it that, it ended with her holding the printed spreadsheet in her hands, silently crying while I sat by the window, arms crossed, not moving to console her. It wasn't out of coldness. I just didn't have anything left to give. That morning, I had planned to go on a long walk, maybe stop at the small cafe near the water and clear my head. I hadn't been sleeping much. Even though I wasn't at home anymore, her presence still followed me. Memories in my luggage, her voice in the back of my mind, guilt curled around my shoulders like a scarf I couldn't take off. But then the knock came. soft, tentative. I knew before I opened the door who it was. She was dressed differently this time. No heels, no statement outfit, just Isla, jeans, sneakers, and a sweatshirt that I vaguely remembered buying her one winter. Her hair was pulled up in a messy bun, no makeup on, and her eyes were red around the edges like she hadn't slept either. "Hi," she said. "I know I shouldn't be here. I didn't know where else to go." I said nothing, just stepped aside and let her in. She stood awkwardly for a moment by the small table, glancing around the modest hotel room like she'd never seen me live so simply. And maybe she hadn't. Our home had always been modern, curated, sharp. This room had none of that. Just a lamp with a loose bulb and a carpet that probably hadn't been replaced in 5 years. But it was peaceful, and it was mine. "For now. I thought you might still be mad," she said softly. I poured her a glass of water and handed it over. "I'm not mad," I replied. "I'm just done pretending." She flinched slightly at that, sat down, cradling the glass like it gave her something to hold on to. "I don't know how to say this without sounding selfish," she began, "but I didn't realize how much I took you for granted until you were gone." I stayed quiet. She sighed. "Everything's unraveling. Aspen, Bali, the board's losing confidence. I had to call off the lounge renovation. Jared keeps trying to spin things, but it's not working." "I didn't make those decisions lightly," I said. "I made them because I was tired of holding up a world that didn't leave room for me." Her voice cracked. "I know. I tried to warn you," I added. "I tried to bring it up so many times. Every time you brushed it aside, like my support was some unspoken obligation." "I know," she said again, quieter. And I was wrong. There was something heavy in her voice now. No sharp edges, no deflection. Just raw truth. It didn't make the hurt go away, but it gave it a place to settle. "I thought I was building something for us," she whispered. "But I was really building something with you holding all the bricks, and I never once asked if your hands were bleeding." That image stopped me for a moment. I sat across from her, folding my arms slowly. They were. But I kept going, because I believed in what you were doing. "I know," she said, eyes brimming again. "I know you did." And I twisted that belief into expectation. That you'd always be there. That I could just keep pulling. She wiped her face with her sleeve. "I don't expect you to forgive me. I wanted you to know that I see it now. Everything. What I did. What I failed to do." I let her words hang in the room. And I realized I had a choice. Not the choice to take her back. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But the choice to speak. Not as her partner, not as her provider, but as myself. Fully honestly. "You didn't just leave me off a guest list," I said. "You left me out of the story. Out of your narrative. You turned us into a performance. And backstage, I was folding props while you took every bow." She looked up at me, guilt thick in her eyes. "I stood in that ballroom," I continued, "not because I needed the spotlight, but because I needed to remember who I was to you. And when I saw your face, when you looked at me like I was an interruption, I knew." She lowered her gaze. "I didn't mean to treat you that way." "But you did," I replied. "And the truth is, if I hadn't pulled the funding, if I hadn't made it inconvenient, you wouldn't be sitting here." She didn't argue. And that, at least, was honest. "I came because I wanted to say something to your face," she said after a moment. "I'm sorry. For every time I made you feel invisible. For every moment I made you feel like an employee in your own marriage." The sincerity in her voice caught me off guard. But still, I stayed still. "Sorry," I said slowly, "doesn't undo what happened. It doesn't put me back at the table." "I know," she said, "but maybe it opens the door." She stood then, slowly, and reached into her pocket. She pulled out the Mont Blanc box I'd left on her pillow. She didn't open it, just held it out. "I didn't accept this gift the way I should have," she said. "Because I didn't see what it really was. It wasn't just a watch. It was every year, every hour, every sacrifice. And I ignored it. I let others call you names in front of me. I let you stand outside the world you helped build." She placed the box on the nightstand and stepped back. "I'm not asking for another chance right now," she said. "But I hope, maybe, one day we can look at each other and not feel resentment." I stood too, met her eyes. "That depends on what you build from here. And whether you remember who helped lay the foundation." She nodded. And for once, she didn't try to spin it, or soften it, or walk around it. She simply said, "Thank you, Reed, for everything, even what I didn't deserve." Then she walked to the door. But before she left, she turned around. I'll make it right, she said. And then she was gone. I stood in that hotel room, silent, for a long time after. The Mont Blanc sat beside me, unopened. The city hummed outside. But inside, something had finally shifted. Not everything was fixed, but the truth had finally been spoken. And sometimes, that's where healing begins. 2 days passed after Isla left the hotel room. She hadn't called again. No texts. No emails. Nothing from Jared either, which was a surprise considering how loud he'd been before. But silence has a strange way of revealing who's truly invested and who's just panicking. In their case, it was obvious. The only reason they called was because the money stopped. Not because they missed me, but because the machine I'd been oiling had started squeaking. And I didn't miss the machine. But I did find myself thinking about her, about everything we built, and how we never really sat down to balance the emotional books. So that morning, I opened the original spreadsheet, the one I had built over months, years even, to track every dollar I'd contributed to Isla's success. At first, it was just about keeping records. But now, it felt different. Now it felt like something more, like proof. Not for her. For me. I added a final tab to the bottom, emotional cost. Not literal numbers, just a space to write what each expense actually represented. I wrote things like, February 2017, $2,500 for rebranding, sleepless nights, canceled plans, skipped anniversary dinner. July 2018, for $1,000 client acquisition trip to Montreal, missing my cousin's wedding. November 2019, $3,200 for the company's team-building retreat, swallowing resentment when I wasn't invited. Line after line, I mapped out the difference between support and sacrifice. It wasn't the money that hurt. It was the invisibility, the erasure. I closed the laptop. Then, something unexpected happened. My phone buzzed, not with a call from Isla, but with a news alert. Argento and Gray hit with sudden staff resignation, citing lack of transparency in leadership. My brow furrowed. I clicked through. Corbin, her lead designer, had resigned, and in his statement, he said, leadership without loyalty fails. We didn't know where the heart of the company was anymore. I stared at that sentence for a long time. I didn't reach out. I just read. And I listened to the silence that followed. Because for once, it wasn't mine to fill. But by afternoon, the storm found me anyway. I had just stepped out for coffee, my first real outing in days, when I saw her again. Not Isla. Marcy. Her assistant. She was standing outside the cafe like she'd been waiting for me. Dressed plainly, hair tied back, nervous eyes flicking around like she wasn't sure if I'd run or scream. Reed, she said, walking up fast. I swear, I'm not here to start anything. I need to talk to someone who understands what's going on. I didn't answer right away. I quit, she said, breathless. This morning. I raised an eyebrow. Didn't expect that. Neither did I, she admitted. But things are imploding over there. Investors are backing out. The holiday campaign launch got shelved. Corbin leaving was a blow, but it's more than that. It's like... Isla cracked. I didn't say anything. I sipped my coffee and let her keep talking. She came into the office yesterday, Marcy went on, and she wasn't yelling or blaming anyone like I expected. She just sat at her desk and stared at that framed photo of the team from 3 years ago. You were in it, you know? The retreat in Sonoma. I remembered that retreat. I'd paid for the house and cooked meals for everyone. They thanked me like I was the caterer. She kept saying, I let him become invisible. Marcy's voice softened. I don't think she's okay. I let that sit for a while. And then, for the first time, I felt something that surprised me. Not satisfaction. Not justice. But sadness. Because for all the damage, all the cold moments and cut corners, part of me still remembered the version of Isla who used to cry from joy over small victories. The version who used to grab my hand under restaurant tables just to feel grounded. That woman had disappeared somewhere along the line. Swallowed by success, maybe. Or by the constant pressure to be more. And maybe I had disappeared too. In a different way. Letting myself become essential but invisible. Needed but never acknowledged. Marcy pulled a folded paper from her purse. She asked me to give this to you. Said she didn't trust herself to say it right. I took the note. Not quickly. Not out of eagerness. But because I knew she wouldn't have written unless she meant it. After Marcy left, I sat on a bench, unwrapped the fold carefully, and began to read. Read, I didn't know how to talk to you anymore without sounding like I wanted something. And maybe that's the problem. I always assumed you give without asking, love without limits, serve without condition. I never stopped needing you, but I stopped showing you. And that's my failure. You were the one thing in my life I never questioned. I trusted you so deeply, I forgot to protect that trust. I built a world and locked you out of it, thinking I was proving my independence. But all I really proved was that I'd lost sight of the man who built the first bricks with me. I don't expect you to come back. I don't even know if I deserve to ask that, but I hope you find peace, even if it's without me. Isla, I read it twice, then a third time. It wasn't perfect. It didn't fix anything, but it was real. That night, I didn't go back to the hotel. I didn't go to our old place either. I booked a new room. Somewhere further from the city, near the water, with no memory carved into its walls. And I sat at the edge of the dock, letter folded beside me, the Mont Blanc watch ticking steadily in my hand. I looked out at the horizon and realized that maybe this wasn't the ending, but it was a reckoning. And in some strange, quiet way, it was enough for now. The downfall didn't come as a storm. It came like a quiet shift in the air. Small things unraveling at the edges until there was no way to deny that the structure was failing. I didn't go back to the office. I didn't reply to Isla's letter, at least not right away. But I watched. And I listened. By the end of the week, it was in the news again. Argento and Gray postpones Q3 launch due to internal restructuring, they said, as though that word could hide the truth. But those who were close enough knew exactly what was happening. The people she depended on were gone, the investors uneasy, the once airtight confidence of the company now leaking through every open crack. Jared had gone radio silent. No surprise there. His loyalty was tied to outcomes, not people. Meanwhile, Isla, well, she was quiet too. Not her usual curated quiet, the kind that came with polished press releases and elegant photo shoots, but a real, raw silence. I didn't hear from her, but I heard about her. From Marcy. From one of her board advisors. Even from Corbin, who sent me a brief message on LinkedIn saying, should have seen it sooner. She was walking on your shoulders the whole time. That line stayed with me for days. Still, I didn't interfere. I wasn't out for revenge. I wasn't sitting somewhere plotting how to make her suffer. I had simply stopped holding up the weight of someone else's empire. And in my absence, the air had changed. A week later, I was walking through a small artisan market on the east side of town, picking up a few things for my new place, candles, loose-leaf tea, a handmade leather wallet, when I noticed a young woman standing at a pop-up booth. She was animated, engaged, showing a product demo to a group of curious onlookers. I wouldn't have stopped, except something about the logo on her banner caught my eye. I walked closer. Zier, natural home diffusers. Crafted by nature, engineered for peace, and then I recognized her. Zadie. She was the startup founder Isla had laughed about once at a dinner party, dismissing her as too grassroots to scale. I remember Isla saying, she's got spirit, but not much structure. Now, here she was, booth full, customers leaning in, energy humming like electricity around her. She looked up and noticed me. Reed Callahan, she asked. I nodded, half smiling. That's me. She walked over. I didn't think you'd actually follow up after that email. I said I would, I meant it. A few days earlier, I had taken a portion of the refunded Bora Bora money, the trip Isla never got to take, and invested it into Zadie's project. It wasn't a huge amount, just enough to help her secure her first warehouse space. I hadn't done it for any public reason. I did it because, unlike Isla's crowd, Zadie looked like someone who still knew how to say thank you. She grinned and held out her hand. You believed in me before the numbers looked pretty. That means a lot. I shook it. You earned it. We talked for 10 minutes about the business, her next steps, the grant application I offered to co-write with her. She didn't fawn, didn't flatter. She simply thanked me, again and again, with sincerity that couldn't be faked. And as I walked away, I realized something. I wasn't just finding peace away from Isla. I was finding purpose. Later that evening, as I sat in my small living room with one of Zadie's diffusers running, my phone buzzed again. Another article. Another fallout. Investor withdraws from Argento and Gray, citing internal discord and transparency issues. I exhaled deeply. Not out of joy. Not even out of vindication. But out of closure. That was the word that kept circling my head these days. Closure. Not revenge. Not punishment. Just the slow, deliberate process of separating what once was from what should never be again. And then, Without warning, I got a message from Isla. Just a photo. No caption. No emoji. Just a single photo of the Mont Blanc watch I gave her, resting on her now empty desk. I stared at it for a moment. The desk used to be cluttered with client files, PR plans, branding decks. Now, only the watch remained. It didn't feel like a guilt trip. It felt like a symbol, maybe even a surrender. Still, I didn't reply. Instead, I sat back and looked around my new space. No marble floors. No curated art on the walls. Just warmth. Honesty. The scent of cedarwood from the diffuser swirling in the air. And in that quiet moment, I realized I hadn't just withdrawn my money from her world. I had reclaimed my presence from a place where it was never properly held. And finally, I could breathe again. It had been almost 3 weeks since I saw Isla. 3 weeks since I pulled the financial cord that quietly powered her world. 3 weeks since she sat in my hotel room and cried for the empire she built, for the man she forgot, for the truth that finally surfaced. And in those 3 weeks, I didn't once reach out. I didn't need to. Some wounds don't heal because someone comes back. Some wounds heal because you stop reopening them for someone who never brought you peace in the first place. But I wasn't bitter. Not anymore. The anger had burned off. What remained was something colder, clearer, a sort of stillness I hadn't felt in years. I moved into a small apartment on the other side of town, quiet street, wood floors, nothing too flashy, just enough. And I started doing something I hadn't done in a long time. Living. On my own terms. One morning, I got an email from Zadie. The subject line read, "You might want to watch this." Inside was a video clip, less than a minute long. From a local entrepreneurship panel hosted at the City Hall. Zadie had been invited to speak about grassroots funding and community-based investment. In the clip, she stood in front of a modest audience, confidently addressing the room with the kind of energy that Isla used to have before she traded gratitude for grandeur. And then Zadie said something that made me freeze. There was one person, just one, who believed in me when I was just selling prototypes in mason jars at street fairs. He didn't ask for shares or branding rights. He didn't demand a spotlight. He just said, "Let me help you grow." That kind of support doesn't just fund your business. It reminds you who you are. The room applauded. My chest tightened, not with pride exactly, but with something more tender. Something like being remembered. For once, I hadn't been the invisible partner. I'd been the difference maker. Not behind the curtain, not erased from the photo. Present. Visible. I shut my laptop and leaned back in the chair, letting that small moment settle inside me. And it was right then that my phone lit up with a text from Isla. "Isele, are you free to meet this evening?" I stared at the screen. It wasn't dramatic. No please. No guilt-laced paragraphs. Just a question. I waited 5 minutes. Then I typed back. "Where?" We met at a small restaurant in the Arts District. Not the kind of place she used to favor. No reservations, no valet, no curated plating. Just warm lighting, soft music, and wood tables with small candles. I arrived first. She came 10 minutes later, dressed in muted colors, no makeup, hair down and loose. She looked tired. Not worn down, but like someone who'd finally stopped running. "Thank you for coming," she said as she sat down. "I was curious," I replied. The waiter brought water. Neither of us looked at the menu. She folded her hands and stared at them for a long moment. "I'm not sure how to start." "Just start," I said. She exhaled. "The company is smaller now. We've cut staff. Returned investor funds. Jared left, resigned 2 weeks ago. And I didn't stop him. I didn't react. I just listened. I've spent a lot of time sitting with the damage. Not just the business fallout, but what I did to you. How blind I let myself become." She paused, blinking back the shine in her eyes. "I used to be so afraid of not being taken seriously," she continued. "Being a woman in this field, being underestimated, dismissed. It felt like I had to always be loud, always polished, always in control. And I thought needing you made me look weak. So I hid you. That was your choice," I said quietly. "But it wasn't just hiding me. It was erasing me. And not just from the company, from your life." She nodded. "I know. And I'm sorry. I know sorry can't undo what I did. But I wanted to say it again. This time, without excuses." The table fell quiet for a few seconds. Then she reached into her bag and pulled out a document. She slid it across to me. I opened it. Legal paperwork. Transfer of business shares. A formal record of repayment for all funds I had contributed over the last 7 years. I had the board review everything, she said. I added 10% on top, interest for time. You never asked for equity, but I'm giving it anyway. You earn more than this. But this is what I can start with. I looked at the document for a long moment. I wasn't sure what to say. This isn't about fixing things between us, she added. I don't expect you to come back. I don't even know if I deserve that. This is just me, taking responsibility. And then, she said something that caught me completely off guard. I want you to know that I'm stepping down. My eyes lifted. From Argento and Gray. She nodded. Effective next quarter. I realized I don't know who I am anymore. I've been leading on a hollow platform for too long. I'm taking a sabbatical. No press release. Just quietly stepping back. That silenced me. Because in all my imaginings of what she might do next, that was never one of them. I thought stepping away would be defeat, she said. But I think it might be the first real choice I've made in years. The waiter came. We ordered 2 teas. For the rest of the hour, we didn't talk about the past. We talked about books, travel, how the sky seemed brighter lately. Simple things. Real things. And before she left, Isla stood at the table and said, I hope you find happiness, Reed. Whether that path leads back to me or far away from me. I hope you feel free. I nodded slowly. And for the first time in a long time, I actually did. Free. That night, I didn't go home with answers. But I walked away with peace. And sometimes, that's more than enough. 2 months later, I stood on the platform at Kyoto Station, backpack over my shoulder, passport tucked neatly in the chest pocket of my jacket. It was early, just past 7 a.m., and the mist still clung to the rooftops like it was unsure whether to lift or stay. I breathed in the air, crisp and clean, tinged with the scent of cedar and distant street food warming up for the day. I hadn't planned this trip months in advance. It wasn't some bucket list destination I'd dreamed of since childhood. No, this trip was impulse. It was instinct. It was the exact opposite of everything my life had been for the last 7 years. And it felt right. I boarded the train without ceremony. No fanfare. No Instagram post. No matching suitcases or synchronized itineraries. Just me. And that, for once, was more than enough. As the train glided along the tracks, the city slowly gave way to small towns and countryside. Fields blurred by. Hills rose like old friends waiting quietly. I leaned my head against the glass, closed my eyes, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel the urge to check emails, reply to anyone, or anticipate someone else's needs. I was just still, and that stillness was sacred. I thought about Isla, but not in the way I used to. She had sent one more message a few weeks ago. No questions, no requests, just a photo of her on a hiking trail somewhere in Oregon, standing next to a tree she'd captioned, learning how to slow down. One step at a time. I didn't reply, not because I was angry, but because I didn't need to. There are some journeys we must take separately, even if we once walked side by side. She was on hers. I was on mine. And that was okay. After arriving at my guest house, I spent the next few days doing something I hadn't done in years, choosing myself. I woke up without an alarm. I ate slowly, sometimes even skipping meals just because I wanted to wander instead. I visited shrines with no tour guides. I walked for hours with no destination. One morning, I sat beside a koi pond for nearly an hour, just watching the fish move. No meetings, no planning, no background noise except birdsong and wind. And the more time passed, the more I realized something. Healing doesn't always announce itself with fireworks or revelations. Sometimes it's quiet, like waking up and realizing your chest doesn't ache anymore, or walking past a couple on the street and not comparing their smiles to what you lost. It's sitting with yourself and not needing to explain why you left, or why you stayed too long. That's what closure looks like. Not a door slamming, but a door gently closing behind you, while you walk forward, not looking back. One evening, while walking through the historic district, I passed a small shop that sold handmade timepieces. Not luxury watches, not flashy status symbols, just wood, leather, and care. I stepped inside and struck up a conversation with the owner. A gray-haired man with soft eyes and hands that moved like he'd been building time instead of keeping it. He showed me a small piece, maplewood face, navy blue band, hand-carved with the words Ichigo, Ichi on the back. One moment, one meeting, he explained. It means every moment is once in a lifetime. Every person, every chance, never repeats. I bought it. Not to replace the Mont Blanc I gave Isla, but to mark the moment I stopped waiting to be chosen, and chose myself instead. That night, I stood on a small bridge, the city lights reflected in the river below. Lanterns floated along the banks. Children laughed in the distance. I checked the time, not out of obligation, but because I could. The watch read 9 p.m. And for the first time in a long, long time, it didn't feel like I was running out of time. It felt like time had finally caught up with me and said, "You're right on schedule." I turned off my phone. No buzzes. No pings. No sudden knocks on hotel doors or emergency calls asking me to fix something I didn't break. Just silence. And peace. And then I smiled. Because I finally understood what all those missed calls, all those panicked emails, all those desperate messages were really about. They weren't about me. They were about losing the version of me that made everything easier for them. The silent builder. The giver. The man who never said no. But I wasn't that man anymore. And the best part? I didn't have to prove it to anyone. Not with cold revenge. Not with court documents. Not with rage. Just with absence. Because sometimes, disappearing is the loudest thing you can do. I spent the rest of the week exploring Kyoto like a man discovering life again. I journaled. I took pictures no one else would ever see. I smiled at strangers. I even helped a lost tourist find her train. And as I packed my things on the final day, I looked around at the small room. The folded linens, the single chair by the window, the bamboo mat in the corner, and I whispered a quiet thank you. To the stillness. To the silence. To the version of me that walked away without slamming the door. As I rolled my suitcase down the narrow street toward the station, I passed a small cafe. The kind Isla would have hated. No menu in English. No Wi-Fi. No brand presence. Just steam in the window and quiet music playing. I walked in, sat down, ordered something I couldn't pronounce. And as the steam rose from the cup, I leaned back in my chair, checked the time one last time, and smiled. Not because someone finally saw me, but because I finally saw myself. My name is Lucas Brandt, but that never seemed to matter much where it counted no. On paper, I had credentials, field certifications, OSHA compliance awards. My name was on countless permits, inspection forms, blueprints, contracts. But on site, in the heartbeat of CarWorks construction, I was always just Franklin's son-in-law. That's how the crew referred to me, how vendors smirked when they saw me negotiating change orders, how clients glanced over me at ribbon cuttings. Not Lucas. Not Mr. Brandt. Just that guy Shelby's sister married. Android Shelby, God, Shelby couldn't tell a grade beam from a grout bag if it were printed on his Palm Springs golf towel. Still, I kept my head down. I believed in the grind. I told myself if I just kept showing up, kept doing the hard things no one wanted to do, checking rebar at 4 a.m., smoothing disputes between plumbers and sparkies, hauling myself to City Hall to push through a delayed permit, someone would notice. Maybe not Franklin, but the work would speak. For 15 years, I was the guy who always showed up. I trained half the crew, taught rookies how to respect the build, not just chase the paycheck. When things went south on a site, whether delays, shipment errors, inspections that made project managers sweat, it was my number they called. My name wasn't on the trucks, but it might as well have been in the mud holding the wheel steady. Still, every company barbecue, every staff meeting, every award CarWorks picked up, it was Franklin up front shaking hands while I stood in the back holding the folding chairs. Even the company website listed me under Field Liaison, a vague title that meant I did everything important while Shelby posted selfies from executive seminars. I told myself it didn't matter. That I was building legacy, not headlines. That maybe, one day, when Franklin was ready to retire, he'd look over his shoulder and realize the guy who stuck around, who helped him survive 2 recessions, labor shortages, and regulatory nightmares. Maybe that guy deserved more than a pat on the back and a reserved parking spot. I was wrong. That Monday morning, the sky was a concrete gray, thick with humidity and the threat of rain. I'd been on the Riverview Bridge site since before sunrise, checking overnight erosion reports, talking with the soil engineer about unexpected groundwater patterns. My boots were caked in mud, jeans damp from the waist down. I pulled into CarWorks HQ with my truck still vibrating from the gravel road. The parking lot was full, too full. I saw Tanya's car, Miguel's pickup, even a couple of city inspection vehicles. That wasn't normal. Inside, the warehouse was buzzing. 40 staff members packed the space, standing shoulder to shoulder near the foreman's table. Franklin stood front and center, clipboard in hand, eyes like marbles. Shelby was next to him, wearing slacks too new for construction and a smug expression that had clearly been practiced in the mirror. I weaved through the crowd quietly, nodding at Miguel, who gave me a look, uneasy, confused. The room silenced when Franklin cleared his throat. "Thank you all for coming in early," he began. "As you know, we've been making plans for long-term leadership transitions here at CarWorks." My stomach tightened. Transitions? This wasn't a word Franklin used casually. My heart pounded, but I said nothing. "I'd like to formally announce that, effective immediately, Shelby Carr will take over as president and CEO of CarWorks Construction." The words didn't register at first. Not fully. They felt like lines from a dream I didn't want to remember. Then he added, "Without even turning to me, Lucas will handle administrative operations moving forward. He'll assist Shelby during the transition." It was like someone poured cement into my chest. My breath stilled. My fingers went numb. Miguel's head turned slowly toward me, his brow furrowed. Tanya shifted her weight, clearly uncomfortable. Even the junior project coordinators glanced around like someone had just dropped a live wire between us. Administrative operations. After 15 years of field work, of bleeding into this company, I was being handed a desk, a chair, a windowless office, and a title that meant stay out of Shelby's way. I wasn't even looking at Franklin anymore. I was staring at Shelby, who grinned like he'd just been handed the keys to a sports car he didn't know how to drive. He clapped Franklin on the back, nodded at the room, and said, "We'll be making some exciting upgrades soon." Upgrades. It took everything in me not to walk out right then and there. But I didn't. Not yet. I clenched my jaw and stood still, arms crossed over my chest, heart pounding against the betrayal. Franklin didn't even look at me when the crowd began to break up. He turned to Shelby and started discussing expansion projects like I was invisible. Like I hadn't just had a decade and a half carved out of my soul in front of my own team. I walked out of the warehouse that day without a word. Not to Franklin. Not to Shelby. Not even to Miguel, who tried to catch my arm but stopped short when he saw the look in my eyes. I got in my truck and sat behind the wheel for a long time, staring at the dashboard. The keys were in my hand, but I wasn't driving yet. My whole life had been this company. And now I was just a ghost with a job title. A man whose work was remembered, but whose name was never known. I looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror. Mud on my face. Eyes like storm clouds. For 15 years, I answered to a name that wasn't mine. But that ended today. The next morning, the sun rose like it had no idea what had been stolen from me the day before. I arrived at CarWorks earlier than usual, though I couldn't say why. Habit, maybe. Loyalty, still kicking like a dying engine. The warehouse was already buzzing, voices echoing, clipboards slapping against palms, forklifts groaning with morning weight. I walked past the whiteboard where Miguel usually scribbled shift rotations and site assignments. Today it was empty, wiped clean, like someone had decided the rules had changed overnight. Maybe they had. I stepped inside the building just as Franklin's voice boomed across the warehouse floor. "Everyone to the loading bay." Now, I didn't need to be told twice. 40 employees gathered. Engineers, laborers, admin staff, foremen, all crammed together under the same ceiling beams I helped design during the expansion 7 years ago. I knew those faces. I'd laughed with them, covered shifts for them, driven some of them home in my own truck when their cars broke down. And now I stood among them not as a leader, not as a mentor, but as a placeholder, Lucas Brandt, the man demoted without ceremony. Franklin stood front and center again, Shelby to his right in a pale blue shirt too crisp for a man who'd never set foot on a job site before college. Shelby looked around like he was sizing up his new kingdom. He didn't know these men and women, didn't know the bruises under their sleeves, the injuries, the exhaustion, the inside jokes that got us through late nights and overworked Saturdays. But he was smiling like he did. Franklin cleared his throat and repeated it, just in case any of us missed it the first time yesterday. Shelby Carr is now president and CEO of CarWorks Construction. There was a pause, just a breath of silence. Maybe it was respect. Maybe confusion. Maybe everyone was waiting for the punchline. But no one laughed. Franklin went on, "Lucas Brandt will move to administrative operations, primarily supporting Shelby as he transitions into leadership." I didn't flinch. Not even as Franklin finally turned toward me, like he was daring me to speak, to challenge him, to say something that would make this a scene. But I didn't move. I didn't blink. I didn't even nod. I just stood there, back straight, hands calloused and stained from a 5 a.m. foundation inspection out in Oak Ridge. While Shelby slept in and Franklin rehearsed betrayal in the mirror, I was out there with concrete beneath my boots and dew on my jacket, making sure their deadlines wouldn't collapse. The silence that followed Franklin's words felt heavier than steel. Miguel shifted his stance beside me. I could feel the question radiating off him. His brow furrowed, jaw tight. He wasn't the only one. Tanya looked stunned. Evan, one of the new hires I had personally walked through his first drywall layout, blinked at me with something between pity and disbelief. Even the junior project staff, those fresh from school, still learning the difference between design and reality, had their eyes flicker toward me, then away, like they were ashamed on my behalf. But I said nothing. Not yet. Franklin kept talking, something about the future, growth plans, digital integration, buzzwords that didn't mean anything without the foundation to back them up. Shelby nodded along like a bobblehead, pretending he understood. The kind of nod you give when you read a sentence twice and still don't know what it means, but you want to look smart. That's all he ever did. Look smart. Play boss. Flash smiles while others bled. When the meeting finally dissolved, I walked away before anyone could ask questions. Miguel caught up to me outside, near the fleet trucks. "You good, Chief?" he asked, quiet but direct. I nodded once. "I'm fine." "You don't look fine," he said. "You look like you're holding a blueprint made of TNT." That made me almost smile, but not quite. "You think I should have said something in there?" Miguel crossed his arms and looked at me for a long time. "No," he said, "but I think you will. When it counts." I left him there, headed toward the main building. Shelby's office, formerly Franklin's, was already renamed on the frosted glass. S. Carr, President. The ink was barely dry on the printout taped over the old sign. I knocked once, then walked in. Shelby was behind the desk, fumbling with his email like a kid trying to program a VCR. He looked up, startled, like he forgot I existed. "Oh, hey, didn't think you'd swing by." "I'm still on payroll," I said. "For now." He laughed nervously. Right. Well, I guess I owe you a thank you. For everything you've done." "You don't owe me a thank you," I said. "You owe the company 15 years of experience you don't have." His face flushed. "Look, I know this is weird, but Dad thought it was time. And I mean, I did get my MBA. And I got my hands dirty," I replied. "There's a difference." He stood, suddenly defensive. "I'm not trying to take your place, Lucas. I just want to bring new energy, you know? A fresh vision." "You can't bring vision to a job you've never seen from the ground," I said. His smile slipped. "What do you want me to say?" "Nothing," I replied. "That's the thing, Shelby. I don't want you to say anything. I just wanted to look you in the eye and let you know that I see exactly what's happening. You weren't handed this because you earned it. You were handed it because of your last name." Shelby opened his mouth, but I was already halfway out the door. Back at my desk, well, the desk that was now somehow less mine than it was before, I sat down and stared at my phone. I thought about calling Isla, telling her everything, asking her if she knew, but I didn't want her voice. Not yet. Not when I wasn't sure if she'd stand with me or behind her father. So I sat there in the quiet, staring at a screen full of digital site maps and half-written RFIs. I thought about the bridges I'd helped build, the buildings that now touch skylines, the crews that still use the techniques I taught them, the relationships I'd forged over 15 years. And I thought about the title I was now expected to accept like a consolation prize. I didn't speak that day, but inside, something was already moving. A shift beneath the surface. The kind you don't see right away, but eventually brings the whole structure down. Because silence, when you've been ignored too long, isn't weakness. It's a fuse. And mine had just been lit. Shelby strutted into the main office the next morning like he'd been building car works since birth. You could practically smell the cologne and entitlement before he stepped through the door. Button-down shirt with too much starch, hair too slick, and a tablet in one hand that he barely looked at. He wasn't carrying tools or permit folders or a rolled blueprint like the rest of us did every day. No, just that damn tablet and a face full of borrowed confidence. He strolled through the hallway like he owned it, passing the project coordinator desk where Rebecca sat sorting site schedules. She raised an eyebrow as he passed, but didn't say a word. We had all learned early on that calling attention to Shelby's incompetence was like kicking a skunk. You might win, but you'd stink for weeks. He didn't greet anyone. Not Miguel. Not Tanya. Not even the receptionist, Paula, who'd been there since Car Works was still running jobs out of a one-room trailer. He walked straight into Franklin's old office, now his, like the king had returned from some glorious campaign. 10 minutes later, he summoned us to the conference room with a group chat message sent from his new company email. All department leads, brief alignment session in 15 minutes. Alignment session, I muttered to myself, staring at the message on my phone. This wasn't a startup. It wasn't a marketing firm with beanbag chairs and ping-pong tables. We were a construction company. We didn't align. We showed up and made sure things didn't collapse. Still, I went. Miguel gave me a side glance on the way in, whispering under his breath, "Let's see what Prince Concrete has in store today." I took my usual spot near the corner of the long oak table. Rebecca was beside me, arms folded. Miguel sat across, one foot tapping against the tile. Tanya arrived late, her hard hat still under her arm. Shelby waited until everyone was seated before tapping his tablet and clearing his throat like he'd been practicing the speech since breakfast. So he began, pacing slowly. "We're entering a new phase of car works. A smarter phase." He smiled like that alone deserved applause. "I've been reviewing our Q3 numbers, and I think we've been approaching project delivery with an outdated mindset. It's time we start optimizing vertical integrations and outsourcing project flow to increase scalability." Miguel blinked. "Come again." Shelby nodded as if he'd been asked to elaborate. "Basically, we need to run CarWorks like a real business, not just a bunch of guys with tape measures." A muscle in my jaw twitched. This bunch of guys had built a dozen commercial projects in the past year alone: schools, fire stations, 3 high-rise shells, and an eco-hub that had just won an award from the city. But he continued, undeterred. "We'll start by shifting procurement to a third-party vendor platform. More efficient, less human error. And as for on-site operations, I'm looking into bringing in an offshore remote management team to handle scheduling and logistics. There's no reason we can't automate most of this." Rebecca leaned toward me. "He's trying to optimize us out of the job." Shelby pointed to a slide on the flat screen, a mock-up of a new organizational chart. He was at the top, of course. Below him, unfamiliar names and roles: Project Logistics Manager, Vendor Coordination Analyst, AI Job Site Evaluator. I had to squint to find my own name, tucked in a box labeled Support Liaison. That was the final push. I straightened in my seat. Shelby turned to me. "Lucas, we'll need you to train the new teams on how we've been doing things, but make sure they understand we're pivoting away from the old models. You'll be the bridge, you know?" A hush fell over the room. I could feel everyone watching me, Miguel holding his breath, Rebecca half smiling like she knew a storm was coming. Shelby stood there, still smiling, like a boy who thought he'd won a chess match with 2 pawns and a prayer. I looked at Franklin. He wasn't there. Of course he wasn't. He'd done his part, handed the keys to his son, stepped back, and let the rest of us sort through the wreckage. I looked back at Shelby, that smug, eager face, waiting for my obedience. I smiled. Calm, slow. The kind of smile people mistake for agreement before they realize it's actually a trigger. "No," I said. Shelby's brow dipped. "No what?" "No, I'm not going to train Shelby. I'm not going to be your bridge. I'm here to resign." The words dropped like a steel beam onto concrete. Silence shattered across the table. Shelby's face froze in confusion. Rebecca covered her mouth. Miguel blinked. Tanya sat up straight, whispering, "Holy shit," under her breath. Shelby laughed once, nervous. "You're not serious." I leaned back in my chair. 15 years of loyalty. 15 years of early mornings, busted knuckles, missed holidays, and bridges that won awards I never got credit for. And you hand the company to your son because he read a few business books? Yeah, I'm serious. Shelby looked like he'd been slapped with a blueprint. But Dad said it. Your dad gave me a job. I gave him stability, clients, growth. I gave him a company that didn't fold when the market tanked in 2010 and 2020. I gave him 15 years, and I'm not giving him one more day. Shelby opened his mouth to protest, but I was already standing. I don't owe this company another second, I said. Especially not when it's being handed off to someone who thinks concrete is a suggestion and not a science. Miguel stood too. Lucas. I looked at him. I'm good, Miguel. I'm just done. I left the room, the stunned silence still sitting heavy behind me. I walked down the hallway, past the framed project photos on the walls, half of which I personally delivered. I went to my desk, grabbed the few personal items I kept there. A photo of Isla and me from our 5th anniversary, a brass measuring scale from my mentor Rick who passed away 3 years ago, and a small leather notebook where I'd sketched solutions that saved projects more times than I could count. As I was walking out, Franklin was coming in through the front doors, phone in hand, deep in conversation. He looked up and saw me. "Lucas," he said, smiling faintly, like he hadn't just let his son cut the legs out from under me. "Big day, huh?" "Shelby's got vision. He's got words," I said. "Not vision." Franklin's smile dimmed. "You're not making this easy." I nodded. "It was never supposed to be easy. It was supposed to be fair." He sighed. "You're too emotional about this." "No," I said. "I'm just done being invisible. You should have known what would happen the moment you asked me to train the guy who's never lifted a beam." Franklin stepped aside, but didn't stop me. Maybe a part of him knew this was always how it would end. He just didn't expect it to be today. He didn't expect me to walk away without pleading, without yelling, without trying to bargain my value back. But that's the thing about people like Franklin and Shelby. They only notice loyalty when it's no longer theirs. Outside, the sun was high, the air thick. I sat in my truck with the engine off for a long while, just breathing. My hands trembled, but not from fear. From release. From the kind of relief that comes when you finally set down the weight no one ever acknowledged you were carrying. I didn't know what I'd do next, but I knew one thing for certain: whatever I built from here on out would have my name on it. Not Franklin's. Not Shelby's. Mine. Because when the hammer finally drops, it doesn't care about your last name. It cares about WH. He shouted, slamming his palm against the desk that I had practically built with my own sweat. The old man's face was flushed to deep red, as narrowing like I was some entitled intern who didn't know the cost of a beam or the difference between pressure-treated and composite decking. But I didn't flinch. Not this time. "No," I said, standing tall on legs that didn't tremble. "You gave me a job. I gave you 15 years of stability. Clients who stayed because they trusted me. Growth because I pushed when the rest of the industry pulled back. I was the structure beneath your facade." Franklin's breath came in hard puffs, like he'd just realized the foundation under his empire had cracked, and I wasn't going to patch it anymore. His hands trembled, though whether from age or fury I couldn't tell. His lips parted like he had more to say, but all that came out was a muttered scoff as Shelby strolled in like a toddler who wandered into the wrong room at a family reunion. "What's the big deal?" Shelby asked, his voice light and condescending, brushing invisible lint off his shirt cuff. "You're still here, right? It's not like we fired you." That tone, that smug, clueless tone. That's when the last nail went in for me, not the demotion, not the betrayal, not even Franklin's pathetic speech about loyalty. It was Shelby's inability to see the insult in what they'd done. The casual dismissal of my contribution like it was coffee fetching or inbox sorting. My silence wasn't resignation. It was clarity. I looked Shelby in the eye, and he flinched just a little. "You're not worth explaining it to," I said, then turned toward the coat hook and grabbed my work jacket, the one with the CarWorks patch sewn onto the chest. I peeled it off slowly, letting the stitching tear just slightly, then folded the jacket and set it neatly on the desk. "Tell your vertical integration team I won't be around for the rollout." I left them standing in silence. Let them talk to each other in buzzwords and blind spots. My feet took me down the familiar hallway where the walls were lined with glossy framed photos of job sites I managed, buildings I'd guided from concept to concrete. Of course, none of the plaques had my name. Just CarWorks. Always CarWorks. When I reached my office, well, the room they called mine, I didn't waste time. I grabbed my notebooks, the engraved calipers gifted to me by a client 5 years ago, a few personal binders, and the wooden model of a suspension bridge I built during my first year with the company. The rest could rot in that drawer. I wasn't coming back for it. Just as I was zipping my bag, I heard a knock and turned to see Rebecca Lynn standing in the doorway, clipboard in hand, brow furrowed. Her eyes flickered between the cleared shelves and my expression. "You're really doing this," she said quietly. "I've already done it," I replied. She stepped inside and closed the door behind her. For a moment, she said nothing. Just watched me. Rebecca wasn't the kind to waste words. Efficient. Sharp. Her reports were always perfect, her deadlines always met. I'd relied on her more times than I could count, especially when Shelby started helping with logistics. "Lucas," she said slowly, her voice steady, "are you done with this company? Or are you done with construction?" I met her eyes, hearing the difference in the question. I looked down at the resignation letter still sitting on my desk, and signed but already decided. My fingers tapped it once. "Depends who's asking." She smiled at that, Just barely, and nodded. There's going to be fallout, she said. Everyone's pretending like Shelby knows what he's doing, but the bids are already slipping. The logistics calendar's 2 days off. Miguel's boiling. Tanya looks like she's ready to walk. That's not my fire anymore, I said. Let them learn how fast a job site burns when the wrong person's holding the lighter. Rebecca studied me again. Then, after a pause, she said, if you ever decide you're not done with construction, some of us would follow. It was a simple sentence, but it hit harder than Franklin's shouting or Shelby's smirk. Some of us would follow. Not because I was their boss. Not because my name carried weight. But because of the way I worked. The way I led. The way I stood on rebar-strewn ground beside them, rain in my face, clipboard in hand, solving real problems in real time without hiding behind titles. I nodded. I'll keep that in mind. She left without another word. I sat down for a moment, letting the room settle around me. This place, this office, this company, I had poured years into it. I'd sacrificed evenings, weekends, holidays. I missed my own 10th anniversary dinner with Isla to finish an emergency permit for a municipal project that Franklin later credited Shelby for. I showed up when it was dark and left when it was darker. And yet, it had never truly been mine. Now it was someone else's mess to clean. I left the building without saying goodbye. I didn't need to. The ones who mattered would understand in time. I drove home slowly, my hands loose on the steering wheel. The sky was low and gray, threatening rain. Somehow fitting. When I walked into the house, Isla was in the kitchen, slicing peaches. She didn't turn around right away. You're home early, she said softly. I quit, I replied. She set the knife down and turned to me, eyes wide but unreadable. No gasp. No flood of questions. Just a long, quiet pause. You knew, I said. She didn't deny it. Dad told me it was happening. I didn't know exactly how, but I knew. Her honesty didn't hurt more than the betrayal. It hurt in a different way. A deeper one. She had known and said nothing. She hadn't warned me, hadn't prepared me, hadn't fought for me. I nodded slowly. Right. Lucas. I raised a hand. Don't. Not now. She stepped toward me, then stopped, unsure. I gave your family everything, I said. And I never asked for a spotlight. Just respect. Just a place at the table I helped build. But I was always the son-in-law. Never the man. She looked down, ashamed. Maybe too late. I walked past her into the living room, dropped my bag on the couch, and sank into the nearest chair. For the first time in years, I had nowhere to be. No schedule to chase. No emails to answer. No name badge to wear. Just a man. With no last name that mattered to anyone but himself. And somehow, that felt like the first solid ground I'd touched in years. Miguel left 2 days after I did. He didn't throw a fit, didn't slam any doors, just walked off-site during a break, handed in his badge, and never came back. Tanya followed a few hours later. I heard about it through the grapevine first, then confirmed it when Rebecca texted me a single line. 2 more gone. They're watching you. Word had started to spread. Quietly at first, like a whisper carried on steel beams and coffee mugs. Lucas Brand had walked. Not stormed out. Not burned the place down. Just walked. And in this industry, when someone who built a company leaves without drama, people pay attention. Because they know it's not emotion, it's math. People like me don't leave unless we've already added up the cost. I didn't gloat. There was nothing to gloat over. I didn't want CarWorks to fail, even if it was falling apart like a half-poured foundation. What I wanted was truth, and now that I was gone, it was surfacing fast. Project managers were calling me privately. Subcontractors were checking in, pretending it was small talk. Even old vendors I hadn't worked with in years were asking if the rumors were true. Had I really left? Was Shelby in charge now? Did I have something else in the works? At first, I said no. Just living. Just figuring it out. But the more I heard about how Shelby was running things, cutting corners, missing bid deadlines, hiring low-ball contractors, the more I realized the people reaching out weren't just curious. They were looking for a way out too. One afternoon, I was at the hardware store picking up some lumber for a backyard pergola I'd been planning to build for over a year but never had time to touch. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. I ignored it. Then it buzzed again. Same number. On the 3rd ring, I answered. Lucas Brandt, the voice asked. Familiar, crisp, but I couldn't place it right away. Speaking. It's Marshall Vane. I stopped walking. Marshall Vane was the kind of client that made or broke companies. Owner of Vane Properties, developer of over 30 mid-tier office parks and commercial strips across the state. We'd worked with him on 2 projects in the past, challenging ones, and he'd always appreciated how I handled chaos without complaint. I heard you left CarWorks, he said. That true? It is. I'm surprised they let you go. They didn't let me go. They replaced me. A pause. Then a small chuckle. Well, that explains it. I gave them a shot at our new Auburn Gateway site. They pitched me a dream, but everything since then has been excuses. Missed specs, terrible communication. They sent me a bid package that looked like a college group project. I'm not surprised, I said. What are you doing now? Building a pergola, I said dryly. He laughed. Well, if you ever start your own thing, something with your name on the trucks, call me first. I'm interested. He hung up before I could respond. That night, I didn't sleep. Not from worry, but from adrenaline. The kind of electricity that runs through your veins when the next move finally clicks into place. I stared at the ceiling until sunrise and then did what I hadn't done in over a decade. I sketched. Not a pergola. Not a bridge. A business. I made calls. Quiet ones. Rebecca met me for coffee that afternoon. She didn't ask what I wanted. She already knew. When I said the words, I'm thinking of starting my own outfit, she nodded like she'd been waiting for it. I'm in, she said. As long as I don't have to sit under fluorescent lights all day again. Next was Miguel. I met him at the old diner off Route 9. We used to eat there during site checks. He brought 2 of his best crew guys with him. One of them, Ray, was a wizard with grading. The other, Nico, didn't talk much but had a reputation for never missing a finished date. You sure you're not just pissed at Franklin? Miguel asked between sips of burnt coffee. I said. Now I'm just ready. He smiled. Then let's get to work. We needed an engineer. I called Tanya. She didn't hesitate. About damn time, she said. I've been getting dumber listening to Shelby try to explain modular framing principles to me like I didn't go to school for this. Rebecca helped secure the paperwork. I leased a double-wide trailer on a patch of commercial dirt a mile outside the city. No sign, no paint, just enough space for a table, a printer, and a mission. We called it Brant Build Construction. Simple, honest, no frills. My name, my work, and nothing I didn't earn. Royce, the accountant from CarWorks, called me one evening from his personal number. I know it's a risk, he said, but I'm tired of balancing books for people who think Excel formulas are a strategy. If you're serious, I'll come with. I'm serious. In less than 2 weeks, we had a skeleton crew. No investors. No marketing firm. No fake buzzwords. Just people who knew what they were doing, ready to work with someone who actually respected what they brought to the table. Then Marshall called again. I've got $1 million office park breaking ground next month. CarWorks blew the pre-con. You want it? I don't have a full fleet, I admitted. No branding. No firm reputation yet. I don't care about logos. I care about delivery. I care about not having to check every email twice to make sure someone didn't miss a code requirement. I exhaled. I'll take it. You'll need bonding, he said. I'll figure it out. And fast. That night, Isla came home to find me surrounded by paperwork, old plans, cost estimate templates, contractor forms. She stood in the doorway for a moment before speaking. You're starting your own company? I am. She stepped inside. And you didn't think to tell me? I wasn't sure if you'd want to hear it. She sat across from me. I know my father hurt you, but if this is your way of getting back at him. It's not, I said. This is about doing it right. For once. Her face softened. Then build it. Just make sure you're building for the right reasons. I didn't respond. I just nodded. Because she was right. I wasn't in this to compete with Franklin or to bury Shelby. I was in this to reclaim what they never gave me. Credit, control, and the dignity of doing things the way they should be done. As I stared at the blank company letterhead I printed minutes ago, I picked up a pen, paused, then wrote the first words that would define the next chapter of my life. Brant Build Construction. Founder and principal, Lucas Brant. And beneath it, like a blueprint finally coming to life, I scrawled the words I lived by. Measure twice. Build once. Lead always. I made the call to Marshall the next morning, my thumb hovering over the screen for a full minute before I tapped dial. The sun hadn't even fully risen, but the buzz in my chest said sleep was out of the question anyway. Marshall picked up after 2 rings, his voice already sharp. Man didn't waste time, even at 6:30. I'm in, I said. Good, he replied. You bring the brains, I'll bring the bricks. And that was it. No drawn-out contracts. No bloated investor meetings or pages of bloated vision statements. Just two men who knew what the other could deliver. By noon, we'd hashed out the terms. Marshall would front the capital, equipment leases, payroll, insurance, and I'd retain majority ownership, creative and operational control. Brantbuild Construction wasn't just a name anymore. It was real, breathing, dangerous. I leased a double-wide trailer on a patch of gravel lot that once housed temporary school buildings after a fire. It wasn't much, 2 rooms, a flickering fluorescent light, and a creaky HVAC unit that groaned louder than a backhoe in winter, but it was ours. I bought folding tables from a liquidation sale, used office chairs from a closing print shop, and a coffee machine that had clearly seen war but still brewed strong. On the first day, I walked in and taped our name to the front window, Brantbuild. Black block letters. No flair. Just solid. Rebecca was the first to show up. She brought a thermos of coffee and a battered laptop already loaded with permit templates and crew schedules. Nothing's connected to Wi-Fi yet, I warned. She sat down anyway. Doesn't matter. I've got enough in here to launch the shuttle. 2 hours later, Miguel pulled up in his truck, Ray and Nico in tow. They didn't say much when they walked in, just nodded and started pulling out their boots and gloves. I handed Miguel a stack of blueprints for the Auburn Gateway project. He flipped through them like they were blueprints to a kingdom. Timeline. Groundbreaking in 6 days, I said. Site prep starts tomorrow. I already pulled temp permits through Marshall's guys. We get this right. We make noise. He gave a low whistle. $1 million office park. Out the gate. It's what we've earned. No more waiting for someone else's green light. By the end of the week, Tanya was back too. She pulled into the lot in her old Ford, the bumper still zip-tied from the last snowstorm. She climbed out and tossed me a roll of drawings before I even said hello. Mechanical plans, she said. Spend all night reworking the HVAC routing. Shelby's version would have failed city code in 4 places. You're not even on payroll yet, I said. She shrugged. Thought I'd start early. It was like the bones of a company started materializing out of dust. We didn't have uniforms, just matching hard hats I bought in bulk. We didn't have a logo, so Miguel's wife painted our name on a plywood sign out front. We didn't have a website, but Rebecca built a Google Drive folder called Stuff That Matters and started tracking every permit, every schedule, every invoice by hand. We were raw, bare, but we moved like a seasoned unit. Because we'd done this before, under someone else's name, someone else's control. And now? Now we were building the thing we always thought construction should be. Honest, skilled, dependable. Without the politics. Without the nepotism. Without Franklin and Shelby hovering over our shoulders with clueless checklists and fake smiles. 3 days before we were due to break ground on Auburn Gateway, I got a call from Royce. Hey, he said, just so you know, CarWorks has already tried to bid on this project again. They lost it, I said, pacing the length of our tiny trailer office. They're desperate. Shelby tried to undercut the timeline, said he'd do it in 6 weeks. Marshall laughed and hung up. That made me smile. Good. Royce continued. I ran your numbers. With Marshall's backing, the first month's payroll and overhead are fully covered. But after that, we need the first milestone payment or we'll have to tap reserves. I'll make sure we hit that first slab deadline early, I said. Marshall's not paying us to wait. After I hung up, I stepped outside. The air was sharp, the kind that reminded you how exposed you were when you didn't have a net. Our lot was still just gravel and weeds, but I could already see what it was going to become. I saw steel, glass, movement. I saw our name, my name, on cranes, on signage, on crew jackets. Later that evening, I went home to Isla. The house felt different now. Not tense, just quieter. She was at the table grading papers. Her expression neutral, not cold, not warm. How was day 1? She asked. We signed on 3 more subs. Tanya's back. Royce ran the numbers. It's happening. She nodded but didn't look up. I sat down across from her. Are you worried? She hesitated. I'm watching. Watching what? You. Who you become now that you're in charge. That stung, but I understood it. Maybe she still wasn't sure if this was a move of pride or of purpose. Maybe she still had 1 foot planted in the house of Carr. I didn't blame her. But I also knew this. Brantbuild wasn't about revenge. It was about presence. It was about finally showing up for myself after a decade of showing up for everyone else. The next morning, I drove out to the Auburn Gateway lot. Dirt, flagged stakes, and a portable toilet. It looked like a mess to anyone passing by. But I stood there smiling, Miguel and Tanya by my side, the sun cutting through the trees like a promise. Miguel clapped me on the back. You ever think we'd be the ones signing the checks? Only every time Shelby told me to fetch coffee, I said. We laughed, and then we got to work. We poured the first footer at 8:12 a.m., 3 minutes ahead of schedule. That's when it hit me. This wasn't the beginning of a company. It was the beginning of a standard. And I'd be damned if I let anyone break it. While we were pouring foundation and framing futures, CarWorks was slowly collapsing under the weight of its own arrogance. I didn't celebrate it. I just watched. Closely. The silence from their end said everything. No spin campaigns. No fake announcements. Just missed calls, sloppy mistakes, and projects limping through delays they didn't understand. It started with the Goldwood Plaza site. I knew that job backward. I'd scoped it from the moment it was a concept sketch. Conducted soil test. Towed boots twice a week. The first report I got came from Tanya's old friend at City Planning. Goldwood had failed a structural inspection. Foundation spacing was inconsistent. Beam supports were undercalculated. Concrete orders had been shorted. But instead of delaying the pour, Shelby had greenlit it and told the crew to stretch the mix. Stretch the mix. Like it was cookie dough. Unbelievable, Miguel muttered when I told him. That site was flawless 6 months ago. I know, I said. It's like watching someone burn down a house you built with your bare hands. And it didn't stop there. Their Westgate Mall expansion project missed a zoning meeting. Their primary site coordinator quit without notice. I heard from Royce that 2 vendors had pulled out of long-standing contracts after late payments and inconsistent specs. Franklin was still trying to play Emperor from the shadows, but Shelby had the controls, and the boy was flying blind. Then, one rainy Tuesday afternoon, my phone rang. Unknown number again. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something in my gut told me to answer. Lucas. Franklin's voice. Rougher now. Slower. Maybe time was finally catching up to him. Or maybe failure was wearing him down. I'm not calling to fight, he said before I could speak. I just wanted to talk. I didn't say anything. Shelby's trying, he went on. But people aren't listening to him. I stared out the trailer window at our Auburn site, watching the rain dot the gravel. Crews were inside the steel shell, still working, still moving. Nobody here needed a title to get things done. They're not listening because he's never earned the right to lead them, I said finally. They respected the work. Not the bloodline. And Shelby's never worked a day in the field. I know that now, Franklin said quietly. Maybe I should have. You should have known 15 years ago, I cut in. When I stayed late on holidays. When I handled fallout from your clients. When I took calls at 2 in the morning so your daughter wouldn't have to hear you panic. There was a long silence on the line. You built something real with CarWorks, he said at last. But it's slipping. I can't stop it. Shelby doesn't have the spine. That's because you gave him the skeleton but none of the scars. He exhaled sharply. What would you do if it was yours again? It isn't. And it won't be. You don't get to ask me that. I ended the call before he could respond. Rebecca walked in a minute later, holding a rolled-up newspaper. Thought you'd want to see this. She unrolled it on the table. There it was. Front page of the business section. CarWorks faces inspection failures, delays at key sites. A photo of Goldwood Plaza stood under the headline like a wounded monument. Shelby wasn't quoted. Franklin wasn't visible. The article mentioned only vague statements from company representatives. I read it once, then again. Want me to frame it? She asked. I shook my head. No. Let it be what it is, truth. The truth was, CarWorks wasn't just failing because Shelby was incompetent. It was failing because it had always leaned on invisible people like me, like Miguel, like Tanya, people who knew how to carry weight without needing the credit. Once those people left, CarWorks became what it always feared, empty branding. And we were growing. Auburn Gateway was ahead of schedule. 2 weeks in, we passed our first city inspection with flying colors. The lead inspector actually lingered to compliment the site cleanliness and crew coordination. Never seen a startup outfit move like this, he said. Usually y'all are scrambling to find your heads. But you move like a veteran. That's because we've been veterans for years, I said. Just under the wrong name. We picked up another small commercial renovation 2 days later. Then another. This time a healthcare center with strict OSHA requirements. Rebecca streamlined the documentation. Miguel worked double to coordinate subs. Tanya re-engineered HVAC layouts with budget-saving efficiency that had our client offering her a job directly. This is different, Tanya said one night, Packing up after a long day. Feels clean. Feels earned. I nodded. Because it is. Every phone call from a former CarWorks vendor now started the same way. Heard what you're building. Got room for one more. People were migrating, not because I was a great salesman, but because they could finally feel respected again. Because Brandtbuild didn't trade competence for family names. One morning, I walked the site with Marshall. The steel bones of Auburn Gateway rose around us, and crews buzzed like a machine we'd oiled ourselves. You seeing this? He asked. I see it every day. He smiled. CarWorks tried to rebid the tenant improvement side of this project. Offered to do it cheaper. I told them we already had a contractor. Let me guess, you didn't say my name. Nope. Just said we'd already found the guy who showed up when it mattered. That stuck with me long after he left. I wasn't trying to crush CarWorks. I wasn't trying to wear a crown. I just wanted to build without having to shrink. And now, finally, we were doing that. The cracks in CarWorks weren't just structural. They were spiritual. They mistook loyalty for leverage. And when that loyalty left the building, there was nothing left but polished glass and a hollow name. Brandtbuild had none of that polish. But we had guts. We had each other. And we were rising steel, sweat, and purpose. One poured slab at a time. He showed up just after sunrise. I was at the Auburn Gateway site, standing by the framing crew, checking alignment on the east wall when I saw the black SUV pull into the gravel lot. Clean. Out of place. Franklin Carr stepped out wearing the same gray wool coat he always wore to groundbreakings, back when they still invited me to those. He looked smaller than I remembered. Older. Like someone had drained the certainty out of him. He didn't ask permission to walk over. Just did. Boots too new for a job site. I scanning the steel skeleton of the project like he was trying to measure something intangible, what had been built without him. Lucas, he said, voice softer than I'd expected. You have a minute? I glanced at Miguel, who raised an eyebrow but said nothing as he kept working. I gestured toward the trailer. 5 minutes. Inside, the heater hissed and the coffee pot gurgled. Franklin looked around like he expected to see something more sophisticated. But this was at 2 tables, stacked plans, and a crew that knew how to deliver. You're doing well, he said, finally sitting. Word is you've picked up 3 jobs in less than a month. 4, I corrected. Signed the 4th this morning. Medical build out in Southridge. He nodded slowly. Impressive. I leaned against the cabinet, arms folded. Why are you here, Franklin? He sighed, the kind of sigh that carried more than exhaustion. It carried regret. I made mistakes, he said. When I passed the company to Shelby, I thought I was protecting what I built, keeping it in the family. You passed it to someone who didn't earn it, I said flatly. You chose blood over backbone. And now you're here because the walls are collapsing. He didn't deny it. CarWorks is in trouble, he admitted. Shelby's lost 2 key clients. 4 subs have pulled out. And the bank is watching us. I knew all this. Not because I'd gone digging, because people couldn't wait to tell me. Every misstep, every fumbled job, every permit denial. They weren't just failures, they were signals. And people had stopped ignoring them. I need your help, Franklin said. I shook my head, already feeling the answer bloom in my chest like a final breath. No. I'm not asking you to come back as an employee, he said quickly. I want you to return in an advisory role. Help stabilize things. Guide Shelby quietly. Be the man behind the curtain again. I laughed. Not loud. Just the kind of bitter, breathless sound that meant everything in me rejected the offer before I could even articulate it. You want me to clean up your mess, I said. In silence. Again. Not silence. Just, let me ask you something, Franklin. If Brandtbuild hadn't taken off, if I were sitting at home angry and unemployed, would you be here offering an advisory role? He didn't answer. You came here because I proved I didn't need you, I said. And that's the only reason you suddenly remember my value. He leaned forward, hands flat on the table. I'm trying to fix what's broken. You're too late. He blinked. You'd really let CarWorks fall? I walked to the window and looked out. Our crew was lifting beams with clean precision. Tanya was marking columns, Rebecca on the phone with a supplier, Miguel guiding a delivery truck back toward the equipment pad. I gave CarWorks everything, I said, still watching the team. 15 years. My 20s. Half my marriage. My name never made it on the trucks, but I was there every damn morning before the coffee brewed. He stood slowly. I thought you wanted to lead. I wanted to build, I said. I wanted to earn my place, not be given it because of a last name. And now I have. He hesitated in the doorway. If you walk away from this offer, It's permanent. It already was. I didn't follow him out. I didn't shake his hand. I watched from the window as he stepped back into that polished SUV and drove off without looking back. The next morning, Marshall emailed me a new bid opportunity, a downtown renovation project for a major tech firm. $5 million. Full design build. High visibility. The kind of project that puts your name on maps, not just clipboards. The email was simple. This is yours if you're ready. I clicked the file, scanned the scope, skimmed the requirements. Then I sat back in my chair and stared at the Brant Build logo Rebecca had designed last week. Still rough, still evolving, but mine. No hesitation. I hit reply. We're ready. Rebecca walked in just as I sent it. New project? I nodded. 5 million. Downtown. Her eyes widened. That's big. Yep. You scared? I smiled. I've been scared since the day I walked out of CarWorks. But I've also never felt more sure of anything. She grinned and walked back to her desk, already firing up spreadsheets and task lists. Outside, the crew didn't even know yet. But I knew what it meant. This was the line in the dirt. The moment CarWorks became the past and we became the present. Franklin offered me a seat behind the curtain. I chose to build the stage instead. And now, they'd all see who really carried the weight all along. The wind whipped across the Auburn Gateway site that morning, sharp and fast like it had somewhere to be. I stood near the east-facing slab, watching Miguel direct a crane operator as steel beams hovered in the air like carefully orchestrated choreography. We were 4 weeks ahead of schedule. Again, Tanya's ductwork was running smoother than any inspector expected, and the city had just passed us on electrical rough-in without a single correction note. Our subcontractors were showing up early. Our clients were smiling. Even the coffee machine in the trailer worked better than it had any right to. Brant Build wasn't just succeeding. It was soaring, and we were still hungry. The calls came in daily now. Inquiries, RFPs, small developers, corporate projects, people who remembered my name from the CarWorks days, and people who'd never heard of me until now, but who wanted in. There was no logo-plastered truck fleet, no jingle on the radio. Just results. Honest work. Delivered without excuses. I walked the site with my hard hat tucked under one arm, boots crunching over gravel. Crew members waved. Some I'd worked with for a decade. Others were new, but already moving with the rhythm of the Brant Build culture, one built not on fear or legacy, but on pride and earned trust. Rebecca met me near the container office, a newspaper in hand. She didn't speak, just held it out, folded to the business section. I took it with a raised brow. Thought you should see it, she said. I unfolded the page and read the headline. CarWorks files Chapter 11 bankruptcy, leadership sites, external challenges, and market conditions. There was a picture beneath it, Franklin's building with its proud old sign, now faded and slightly tilted. A smaller subheading mentioned key personnel exits, operational delays, and client attrition. Shelby's name was nowhere in the body of the article. Neither was mine. But between the lines, I could hear everything that wasn't being said. I didn't smile. I didn't feel triumphant. I just felt still. This was never about revenge. I didn't start Brant Build to bury CarWorks. I started it because I couldn't survive being invisible anymore. Because 15 years of showing up for a name that never saw me was long enough. But that headline, that quiet fall, meant something. Not just as validation, but as closure. I passed the paper back to Rebecca. No need to pin that one up. You sure? She asked. You earned this. I didn't build Brant Build to spite them, I said. I built it so I'd never have to go back to being someone else's leverage. She nodded slowly. Still, poetic. It was. In a way. I stepped into the trailer, where Tanya was unrolling schematics for our next job, a library remodel in Edgewood. She was already arguing with the supplier over an HVAC delay, flipping between plans and budget allocations with effortless command. Royce sat at the back corner, crunching payroll numbers for our new hires. We good on the Mason bid? I asked, leaning into the space. Royce gave a thumbs up without looking up. Sent this morning. Tight numbers, clean scope. They'll say yes. Tanya didn't even glance up from her plans. The new guys start Tuesday. I'll walk them through duct install. No drama. No drama. I wanted to frame that. Everything we did now was grounded in trust and ability. There was no management trying to climb over us. No executives second-guessing what they didn't understand. There was only momentum, and the determination not to let what we were building get contaminated by the rot that brought CarWorks down. Later that afternoon, I stood out near the north side of the site as the sun began to dip. The framing crew had wrapped early, and the tools were packed. I lingered, looking over the skeletal outline of a building that was rising because of belief, mine, theirs, ours. Miguel walked up beside me, sipping a bottle of water. "You see the article?" he asked. "Yeah. Feels weird, right?" "Yeah." He let out a long breath. "I mean, we knew it was coming. But still, CarWorks was the giant." "It was never a giant," I said. "It just had a long shadow." He looked at me sideways. "Think Franklin saw it coming? He built on loyalty he never earned. Eventually, that foundation cracks." We stood in silence for a while. "You think Shelby's still in there, trying to fix it?" he asked. "No," I said. "He never knew how to fix anything. He only knew how to inherit." Miguel nodded. "You're not gloating. I thought you'd gloat." "What for?" I shrugged. "They handed me silence. I answered with structure. They gave me limits. I gave myself freedom." He smiled. "You gave us something too." I didn't answer that. Just kept watching the sun roll over steel and sky. Later that night, I drove home, the radio off, the windows down. I didn't call Isla. Didn't tell her about the article or the calls I was getting about expansion or the new bid requests stacking up in our inbox. I just drove with the quiet knowing that I had done what I set out to do. Not just leave CarWorks, but outlive it. At home, the porch light was on. Isla was grading papers in the living room, a glass of tea beside her. She looked up when I walked in. Not surprised, just calm. "They filed?" she asked. "Yeah." She nodded once, then turned the page in her binder. "You okay?" "I am." She closed the binder slowly, rested her hand on top. "I know what it cost you, Lucas. All those years. All that quiet." I sat across from her, the old chair creaking under me. "It wasn't wasted," I said. "It just took me a while to stop waiting for permission." She reached out, touched my hand lightly. "So what now?" "Now." I smiled. "Now we pour the next slab." There were more jobs ahead. More teams to train. More young builders who would never know the CarWorks hierarchy, only the standard Brant-built set. A standard built not on titles or bloodlines, but on action. On concrete truths. Truth like this: if you build with integrity, people will follow you, even when you start with nothing. Truth like this: legacies aren't inherited. They're earned. And truth like this: when you finally stop waiting to be seen, the world has no choice but to look. Steel stretched into the sky like ambition finally given form. I walked the perimeter of our newest mixed-use development site, boots coated with dust, clipboard under one arm, and a kind of quiet in my chest that I hadn't felt in years. Not the tense, hold-your-breath kind. The other kind, the deep exhale. The earned one. We were months into the project, and Brant Build had moved past the new kid phase. We weren't just a fresh name anymore. We were a name people trusted. Contractors called us first. Clients didn't second-guess our numbers. City officials knew our paperwork would be clean before we even filed it. That kind of reputation takes time, unless you've already paid for it with years of someone else's name stamped over your work. Miguel waved from across the lot, clipboard in one hand and radio clipped to his vest. I gave him a nod. Tanya was already reviewing the new concrete mix delivery. Rebecca had just confirmed another contract in Southridge. Royce had finalized payroll before the deadline without me even checking in. And not a single one of them needed permission to do what they did best. That was the whole point. Build the right structure, and you didn't need to micromanage it. I walked through the site slowly, running my hand along a fresh beam as I passed. It felt solid, clean, real. The kind of work you knew would outlive you. Rebecca caught up to me near the staging zone, tablet in hand. Tenant rep just called. They want to increase the first floor ceiling height. Said they're fine with a change order if we can adjust by next week. We can, I said. But I want Tanya to confirm we're not compromising anything upstream. She's already on it, Rebecca replied, tapping something into her screen. Of course she is. Rebecca smiled. It's almost too smooth, you know? Like we're missing the chaos. Chaos was the old way, I said. This is just what happens when everyone's in the right seat. She hesitated, then pulled something out of her bag. A small, silver nameplate. What's that? I asked. Found it in an old CarWorks box I brought over months ago. Meant to show you. She handed it to me. It read, Lucas Brant, Field Liaison. I stared at it for a moment. That title. That box. That era. Burn it, I said. She laughed. Already planned on it. I slipped the plate into my pocket anyway. not because I missed it, but because sometimes a reminder of what you were called makes what you've become feel even heavier in your hand. After she left, I stood alone for a while, watching as our structure began to resemble the renderings on the wall of our. He just never imagined one of those places would be away from his company, his legacy, his idea of who I was. I didn't leave to get even. I left to get clear, to stop measuring my worth against the frame someone else forced around me. And now? Now I had my own frame, my own blueprint, my own name on the permit. I walked back to the trailer, opened the door, and sat at the desk that still smelled faintly of paint and progress. On the wall behind me, our logo, rough at first, now refined, hung in bold lettering, Brant Build Construction. I looked at it for a long time, then reached for the small wooden sign I'd carved myself after we landed our first job. On the back, I'd etched 4 simple words. Earned, not inherited. Always. I smiled. Because this wasn't just a company. It was a standard, and I would never hand it to anyone who hadn't bled for it the hard way.